When thinking about the moments in European history when contact with Islam took place, it becomes clear that this contact occurred in different ways and under varying circumstances. For example, through trading relations, but also due to wars or through shared borders. This diverse framework shaped the way in which people of these two cultures would perceive each other, deal with each other, and hence how they would remember each other. However, it has to be stressed out that memory is always a construct. On the one hand, it is linked to one's own perception and is therefore subjective. On the other hand, there are many different ways in which memory comes into being. As some are created to serve a certain agenda, or even propagandistic intentions, other times memories might be altered over time. Therefore, memory can be considered fluid and multi-layered. However, memory is also linked to oblivion. Certain markers of the past, such as architecture or language, can be forcefully destroyed or manipulated to make certain aspects of the past fall into oblivion. Memory has to be understood as a curated version of the past, similar to a photograph, which can always only express the view of the beholder. An example for memories that were supposedly shaped to correspond to a certain agenda are the so-called Türkendrucke, which can loosely be translated as prints about the Turks. By this, it is meant Ottomans or sometimes even Greeks and Muslims in general. These written pamphlets were produced in the German-speaking world and circulated there during the 16th and 17th century. Although these texts and also images declare to portray Ottomans, of course, they do not give a realistic image of them, but rather take a negative point of view. The intention here was to stimulate an aversion against the Ottomans and foster fear within society, as during this age the Ottomans were political enemies, amongst others. Followingly, these prints shaped the perception of the Turk, leading to certain stereotypical ideas about him within the collective memory. It becomes clear that one always has to ask what is preserved from the past, how it is passed on, and what is dismissed, what was made unseen or altered, and for what purpose. Because it is important to understand that there is always a certain agenda behind the narration of the past. And by the selection of what is told and kept and what is not, power over the narrative is created. Moreover, it is important to stress that memories always circulate from one person to another, within a society or even transnationally between different societies. Memories can also be passed on from generation to generation and hence travel through time, so to say. At the same time, memory is always bound to a certain materiality or medium. Objects that were inherited from the past are considered material heritage, and hence they are by nature associated with memories of the past. That is, for example, the case for Islamic weapons in collections of noble families all over Europe in early modern times. The objects were handed down as the treasure that would commemorate the ancestors' participation in the wars against Muslims. Or another example are Islamic buildings that were kept as heritage even under Christian rule, due to their symbolic meanings. Then there are also memorabilia, which are objects that were specifically made to materialize certain memories or notions of the past. A very fitting example here is a medallion that was produced in Austria under the reign of Emperor Leopold I to commemorate the reconquest of Belgrade in 1688 from Ottoman forces. On the one side, the coin shows the city, Belgrade, together with an inscription that refers to the capture of the city by the Ottomans. On the other side, the coin shows a dog, together with an inscription that makes clear that the animal represents the Ottomans, as they were, so to say, snapping for Vienna and Hungary, like a dog would for a bone. But they failed and are now losing whole Hungary. The purpose of this object is obvious. The medal links a historical event with a negative and defamatory image of the Ottomans. The simultaneous depiction of one's own victory and the mocking of the enemy results in a memorabilia that aims to show and preserve the Habsburgs' power and superiority over the Ottomans. On the other side, already existing objects or even landscapes and places could also be charged with memories and would become lieux de mémoire. Examples include flags or tents, but that were captured from the enemy and then used as trophies to symbolize one's own victory. Moreover, immaterial heritage is a substantial part of the culture of remembrance. In this regard, especially language can become a driving force of memories. And as language can be understood as a testimony of the past, when, for example, certain words are taken from other languages and hence work as a memento of their own interaction with a foreign culture. Also, in some cases, certain words that survive from an alien language in their own language give clues on the ways in which the two cultures interacted and can evoke memories of specific moments of contact. For example, the Bosnian language includes multiple words that have their roots in Ottoman Turkish, as today's region of Bosnia and Herzegovina was for a long period under Ottoman rule. Besides language, also storytelling or oral history contributed to the creation and circulation of memories. Most of the mentioned examples can as well be considered under the aspect of shared heritage or shared memory. This is the case when, due to contact between Islamic and European cultures, exchange, appropriation, or even forms of merging took place. When, for example, war booty was captured by Europeans after military encounters with the Ottomans, including weapons, arms, or other objects, these goods can be considered as having two natures. On the one side, they are Ottoman and served a certain purpose within the culture of origin. On the other side, in the hands of the new owners, the same objects were perceived and used differently, for example as collectibles or trophies, hence for representational purposes. Through the transfer to a different context, these objects happen to belong to two different cultural spheres at the same time. Additionally, there is also cultural hybridization, where elements of one culture merge with elements of another. An example is the Mezquita Cathedral of Cordoba. The building was originally erected by the Umayyad caliphs as a mosque during the 8th century. However, in the 13th century, after Cordoba was conquered by the Spanish Christian kings, the mosque was turned into a church and a chapel was built inside the mosque. One might ask why the mosque was not destroyed and a church built in its place instead. On the one hand, the preservation of large parts of the mosque, as well as the insertion of a chapel into it, allows to use the whole building, as a kind of trophy symbolizing the takeover of the Caliphate of Cordoba by a Christian ruler. If the building had been destroyed, the element of conquering would not have been shown so strongly, and thus, due to its hybrid form, it becomes a much more powerful commemorative symbol. On the other hand, by adapting the mosque in such a way, it also becomes an expression of legacy, due to the combination of an older Islamic mosque and a newer Christian chapel. The Christian ruler, in a figurative sense, puts himself in line with the previous rulers. He inscribes himself into the cultural heritage of the former ruler, as to suggest a certain continuity. Moreover, the splendor of the material heritage of the Islamic culture is thereby taken over into the Christian culture. Hence, by creating this hybrid architecture, certain associations that come with this building are fostered, while other aspects, such as it actually being an Islamic place of worship, are intended to fall into oblivion. Moreover, cultural hybridity could also result from social exchange. When people or objects from Islamic cultures came to Europe, either due to conflicts, trade, or migration, different sorts of cultural mixing took place. Thereby, elements of one culture were taken over into another. It can be especially observed in the arts and crafts. This is also how we happen to have, for example, weapons that were produced in Transylvania in the 17th century, but also in the 16th century, that would combine local and Ottoman stylistic and formal features. In other cases, Ottoman objects were combined with elements originating from the European cultural sphere. For example, a blade of an Ottoman saber would be combined with a German hilt, resulting again in a hybrid object. It can be concluded that memory, oblivion, and heritage are interdependent and all play a role in the creation of the Islamic legacy of Europe. They emerge under the influence of political and social circumstances, as well as the intentions of individuals, such as rulers, nobles, but also common people and even craftsmen. Moreover, memories themselves are constantly manipulated and altered, sometimes consciously and sometimes unconsciously, and some aspects of them fall into oblivion.